This is a review of the second season of the TV show You. The second season of You was very different from the first, taking place in LA rather than New York, and having a totally different tone. Don't get me wrong, it was very good, a well put together piece of TV, but whereas season 1 was totally believable and realistic, the second season required much more suspension of disbelief. The tone or flavour was also very different, which I guess is fitting since it takes place in LA, which has a very different reputation and environment than New York. The protagonist is still Joe Goldberg, who is now living under a false identity in LA, a city which he hates. He fled there after the surprise return of Candice at the end of season 1, fearing exposure for murdering Beck and for the attempted murder of Candice prior to the show. In LA, Joe is apparently trying to live a single, quiet, low-profile life and staying away from his own version of love, but he is gradually lured into an obsession with Love Quinn. Okay, I recommend this TV show, though it's not as good as the more realistic first season, and I suspect that a third season would totally lose touch with reality. Mild spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, the first season opens with Joe trying to keep a low profile and apparently determined to stay away from relationships. He is going under an assumed name and working in a boutique grocery store with an attached bookstore and restaurant. Joe meets his somewhat hostile apartment complex manager and her younger sister, both of whom will be important later, as well as Love Quinn, who works at the store and who finds Joe attractive and opens a flirtatious conversation with him while he is watching her with supposed stealth. Throughout the first episode, we are again treated to Joe's internal dialogue. However, unlike the first season, Joe actually lies to us in the first episode. At the end of the first show, we see that he's actually been stalking Love for a while, and that he chose his apartment in order to be able to spy on her via telescope. And he researched and manipulated the interviewer at the grocery store into giving the job that he wanted. The biggest surprise, and also the first red flag that this season was going to be less realistic, was Joe entering his storage unit, where he had a full-size plexiglass book cage like the one in the first season, with a person in it. Now, two things bother me here. First, while Joe was always an unreliable narrator who sees reality in a warped and twisted way, this is the first time that he has outright set out to deceive the viewer. I can understand that the writers wanted to play with our perceptions, and it was a pretty good trick, but honestly it left rather a sour taste in my mouth because who was Joe actually lying to? Does he know that we're watching him? Is he lying to Love, whom he addresses at times? But she can't hear his thoughts, can she? So what? Okay, now the second thing is, while I can imagine Joe is still mentally unstable and quite willing to kidnap people, I cannot imagine how someone who fled with basically whatever they could grab on the way out could possibly fund buying the material and building a plexiglass cage in a storage unit. Even assuming Joe, who has never demonstrated any particular aptitude for craft or home improvement, had the skill to build such a thing from scratch, how would he do so without anyone noticing the arrival of materials or the construction noise? And how did he have time to do it? Even assuming Joe pre-packed a fugitive bag stuffed with money, it is kind of unlikely. And if he had done that, then he would have procured a fake ID or two beforehand. I think its rather unbelievable presence in this season adds to my theory that it is used in a symbolic way. More on that at the end. The detainee is Will Bettelheim, a seller of fake IDs that Joe met via Craigslist, and who was foolish enough to boast about his own watertight fake persona, which Joe assumed for himself upon kidnapping the man. Now, I don't spend much time in the LA underworld, but that level of openness with a person that you just met in order to sell a criminal service appears unwise, to say the least. The fact that no one else appears to know this criminal mastermind of fake identity makes me wonder why he has no friends who might worry about his sudden vanishing. Joe's first murder in the city is a criminal who wants Will, the detainee in the book cage, to return $50,000 handed over in a criminal enterprise of some sort. Since he has never met Will before handing over this sum, he stalks and threatens Joe, who lures him to the storage unit and kills the man in self-defense, although the perfectly placed sheet of plastic on the floor show that this was, in all likeliness, planned from the start. Luckily, the only witness, Will in the cage, is having a psychotic break and believes that he imagined the whole thing. while Joe, who is being stalked by hallucinations of Beck, who is playing Jiminy Cricket to his Pinocchio, has now reached the level of brutality that he can debone and mince the corpse at the restaurant where he works, a disposal method that he had considered using but rejected as too gross in the first season. Joe is much more comfortable with doing bad things in this season, even as he tries to avoid them. He has this whole thing going on where he is trying to be a better person so that he can be worthy of the woman that he loves. But his whole trying to give up murdering people came across darkly comedic, and actually the whole season has a lot more grim comedy in it than the first. He is undergoing a crisis of conscience as he gets to know Love better. She obviously likes him and wants to be with him, while he is frightened that he will do to her what he did to Beck, and they have a hot-cold dance going on for a while he pulls back and she pushes forwards. There are various subplots, twists and turns, but the B storyline is mainly about Ellie, the younger sister of his apartment manager Delilah, and her dealings with the suspected pervert comedian, and Joe's white knighting his way into the situation, which results in complications and him falling off the murder wagon again. Later, the arrival of Candice, who stalked him from New York and who survived Joe's attentions prior to the first season, keep Joe on his toes. We also have the saga of Love's rich but dysfunctional family, who come across as rather bad people. 40, Love's brother, is a selfish, sometimes drug addict, who is dependent on his sister to keep him out of trouble. While he comes across as a joke for most of the season, he did show a dark side while on a drug bender and staged a light version of Indecent Proposal to a newlywed couple, which Joe predicts will ruin their marriage. 40 also sends Joe on an unexpected LSD adventure which prevents him from leaving the US and thus Love, and which starts up another subplot when Joe is unsure who actually committed one of the murders. All in all, it was very enjoyable TV, but it was very much TV physics, with the unlikely and the improbable strangely common. Maybe because it's set in LA, this season quickly lost touch with the first season's realism. Doesn't take much suspension of disbelief to imagine Joe being successful as a creepy stalker in season 1, and he never really did anything hugely outside of the believable. But this season depends much more on improbable chance and making Joe more skilled than he has a reason to be. Now, counter to that, I must say they did a good job growing and developing Joe's character, and he really was believable in his conflicted nature. 40 and Love were believable as codependent siblings. They had kind of a creepy incest vibe going on, though that was never really explored much. Love's friends in LA are a little bit caricaturish. At least I assume so. Perhaps LA really is home to stereotypical hipsters. Also, something of a caricature are her disgusting parents and the scrappy teen girl of colour and her sister, both of whom Joe White Knights on incessantly. Overall, however, everyone got just the right amount of story time to make it work. Total spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Candice was also believable as a nut, even before she was traumatized by her near murder. However, her ability to track Joe was somewhat less believable. And to be honest, I don't really think that any cop would tell a woman who has just been buried alive to just drop the case and vanish without even bringing the suspect in for questioning. Joe's background story was explored, but in a rather patchy manner. And when we get the big reveal that Love killed, well, to be honest, an indeterminate number of people over the years, it is all actually believable, at least for TV land. However, the very end, where Joe has gotten everything he wanted, a pregnant wife who needs and loves him, and then indicates that he's going to start stalking the neighbour, that left rather a bad taste in my mouth, just like the end of the first episode did. It wasn't really believable in context of the Joe that we have seen this season, dropping him down to the level of a common panty thief, an erotomaniac, rather than an obsessive philomaniac. I also felt almost as if this was done to make him less sympathetic than they had painted him. The few discussions from cast and producers that I have listened to gave me the distinct impression that they really dislike that viewers respond in a semi-positive manner to certain aspects of Joe. I feel that they felt the need to make him clearly not a true white knight and elicit a more visceral dislike from the viewer. The last scene left me feeling something like Buffy Spike shippers felt after the bathroom scene from Seeing Red. And that scene was, I think, created for the same reason, to make a semi-likable character look truly bad. Love is believable as the quiet, female version of Jo. Getting them together was the ending you almost hoped for, despite knowing it was impossible for Beck and Jo in the first season. This couple was much better matched, though not in a good way. Now, they made Love just a touch too skilled and too able to outsmart Jo easily, but the ascension of the feminine over the masculine is something of a media trope at present. Love, however, was at all times feminine in her creepiness, though she was not toxically female, controlling, manipulative, and so forth, to anything like the extent that her mother was. She came across as being a touch more ruthless and competent than Jo when committing her first murder as a teen of the babysitter who was abusing her brother, and when the mask of normalcy was removed, she projected the same creepy darkness that Jo had in season 1. C.S. Lewis points out that you will get a fairer deal from a man than from a woman who is protecting the interests of those she loves. As he says of the choice between a greedy tyrant and an overly powerful ruler acting in what they think are your best interests. The tyrant may have limits on his greed, but the latter's tyranny, wrought in good conscience, will have absolutely no limits. Love was, like Jo, willing to cross any line for those that she cared about. In this, they were the same. However, unlike him, she was willing to put her own safety, her life, in Jo's hands when she had him in the same position that he had held Beck. Unlike Jo, who always hid his true nature in both seasons and became what he thought the object of his desire wanted, Love wanted to be seen and loved for herself. Now, I'm going to stop here except for a brief discussion of the book cave as a motif in the series. All in all, the season is good, but not as good as the first, and not as believable either. I don't have a strong expectation of the third season being any good should it come into existence. Now, the cage. The cage had a similar role in the first season as a place of Gnostic transformation. You can refer to my ideas on that season on my other review. Will, the fake ID guy, went into the cage and emerged to a happier, better life. Although with Jo at times having a tenuous grip on reality, I did wonder if Will was actually dead instead of flying to the Western Isles of the Philippines. I guess that counts as an afterlife. Anyway, Will is transformed in the light of the cage, while Love secretly sits there without Jo knowing that she knows his true past, reading, as Jo did in the cage, and apparently trying to get some form of enlightenment. The role reversal from the end of season 1 with Jo in the cage, stuck in the light, and Love on the outside calling him to join her, is interesting, especially since he effectively locks himself in by dropping the key through the air hole, in the same way that he has been attempting to lock himself into normal moral behaviour throughout the season. He got himself into trouble white knighting, and he was willing to leave Love in order to not have to kill Delilah when she discovers his secrets. This is a huge leap forward for Jo. He didn't pack up and leave to save Beck, and when he is overpowered by mere civilian pepper spray and locked in by Candace, it certainly appears that he would have been able to escape and kill Candace had he been determined to do so. If you imagine the well-lit cage as being inside the box of conventional thinking and morality, then he judges himself guilty, and unlike his incident with Beck in season 1, he chooses not to escape by using the secret key. In fact, he willfully traps himself inside because he accepts what Candace says, that he really is a bad person. In a way, he is taking Beck's place in the drama, and when he makes the choice that she couldn't, to accept living with a killer, it's not to save his life or to preserve his freedom, both of which he shows little regard for at this point and later during the final incident with 40. Or even to be in a relationship with Love, it's to white knight Ellie, and for the sake of his unborn child. In a sense, I felt like this was Jo's attempt at completing a redemption story, which is why, to be honest, the last clip with him perving on the neighbour felt cheap and rather out of character, throwing away the development achieved throughout the season. Okay, if you listened thus far, please tell me what you think and give me a thumbs up or down.